Hello, this is the Provoked Prawn, and this is the Redragon Horus TKL K621 RGB. And as you can see here, a really interesting looking keyboard, which I discovered by accident when browsing Amazon and noticing a keyboard that was affordable and yet seemed to be remarkably similar to the Logitech G915 TKL, which is my favourite keyboard. And when I say remarkably similar, I mean almost identical, as you can see the two shots side by side. Now I'm going to do a comparison video in the near future to talk about the differences between these two and whether the G915 TKL is worth the considerable amount more money that it is versus the Redragon, and whether the Redragon can actually stand up to a comparison. But in this video I'm going to be talking to you about my experience with this Redragon Horus TKL and what it's been like to use. Redragon was kind enough to send over the keyboard for testing purposes, but I will note that it is £60 sterling, which is very affordable, and I very nearly purchased it myself. So I am going to talk about whether it's worth paying that amount of money for. Now this is a really interesting keyboard on paper. It's a wireless keyboard that supports both Bluetooth 2.4 GHz and USB-C connections, so you have 3 different connection options on it. It also has multiple different onboard profiles, multiple different hardware level lighting controls. It has macro recording capabilities that you can do on the fly. It has dedicated media playback buttons, a volume wheel, and loads of other hidden features that come within function presses and key presses. It's also hot swappable, so you can swap out the key switches, and inside the box you'll see that you have a keycap puller, a key switch puller, and some extra switches as well. Now this is an unusual setup for a TKL low-profile keyboard. Naturally you get quite a few hot swappable keyboards out there, but you don't often see a low-profile one, because this uses low-profile switches, which you will find are very hard to get hold of. They're nowhere near as easy as standard switches, and so although it's hot swappable, you'll really have difficulty finding a wide variety of alternatives, at least from what I've seen. If you wanted to change the switches out on this keyboard, it wouldn't be terribly easy, it wouldn't be terribly cheap, but it's interesting that it is an option. On the underside you'll see that the USB dongle, the 2.4 GHz dongle, is stored in there, and you have some little feet to flip it up. Now the reason I love the G915 TKL, and the reason this one also appeals, is that low profile setup. It sits really low on the desk, and you'll see what I mean in a minute, but you can see that you can flip the feet up and have it at an angle. But the reason it's nice is because it's so low profile, your wrists aren't tilted up at an angle, and so it makes it very comfortable. Also, you've got a very thin keyboard with a really nice finish on it. It's got this really nice brushed aluminium finish design to it, and it looks really nice. One thing that strikes immediately is the RGB lighting is really good. Now there is some flicker in the video here that you're seeing. I can tell you that you don't actually see that in real life. For some reason the camera is picking up a flicker that isn't actually there. I tried adjusting the various settings, but I couldn't get it to go away for some reason. I don't know why, but it isn't an issue, so don't worry about a serious flicker in the real world. But here you can see a little look at the switches. So you get a handful of extra switches included in the box, which I suppose is good if some of the other switches wear out over time. You have a detachable USB-C cable, which I will note oddly plugs in on the top left of the keyboard, roughly where the escape button is, on the left hand side rather than the top, which seems like a strange positioning for it. But obviously it does mean that you could use your own custom keyboard cable, maybe a coiled one, and I'll talk about why this keyboard's best in wired mode a bit later on. But it does offer Bluetooth, and you can see that the 1, 2 and 3 keys have BT 1, 2 and 3 on them. That's because you can have up to 3 different Bluetooth devices paired with it. It also has 2.4 GHz and USB on 4 and 5. If you press the function button and those keys, you can switch between those modes. So you have multiple different connection options. Now, as I said, you can remove the keycaps with relative ease, and they just pull off, and you can see the process for doing that here. And the tool allows you to then get access to the switches, and you can see the red switches on the underside here, and you can get a look at the keycaps. Now, nothing on this keyboard is particularly fancy. Obviously, it is a very affordable keyboard at around £60 sterling, so I wasn't expecting it to be super fancy. However, it is really surprising in a number of different ways. The fact that you can hot swap the switches, so you can take them out when it's turned on and replace them with other ones, is obviously an interesting highlight and something you'd see on more expensive keyboards. And so this keyboard, once again, surprises in several different ways, and the fact that you can do that. I just don't think you'd be able to find a lot of replacements for this, but if you can, then you will be able to. The keycaps, however, will also be a struggle to find replacements for, although they do have that standard sort of Cherry MX style of crosshatch switch design. So there should be, if you can find some low profile keycaps, possible to swap them out. It's just you need to take these sort of things with a pinch of salt. Now I'm going to do a sound test on the keys a bit later on, so stick with me for that, and I'll leave a proper detailed bit at the end. But these are actually quite nice sounding switches. I will say that they aren't as good as the ones on the G915. Check out that comparison video to find out more, but they are still very nice to type on. And the fact that they're low profile means that they actuate nice and quickly, and they've got a reasonable amount of nice feedback from them. They aren't terribly loud, and that is obviously a bonus and a good setup from this. And this etching on the lettering is also surprisingly good. Lets through a nice bit of RGB lighting, both through the lettering and the surroundings. Again, you have to ignore the flashing effect here, because that isn't what it's like in the real world, but it is still pleasing. Now I'm just going to be quiet for a second so you can hear the sound test. What you see is it sounds pretty nice. It has a very nice setup in that way. Now, there are some other buttons at the top. So you have some rubberized effect buttons. You can see the G buttons in the top left. That's actually for recording macros and other things. And then you have some media playback buttons there. You also have a volume wheel on the top right, which I found to be a bit sort of scratchy when you use it. And again, it feels kind of cheap. But it's actually multi-purpose, because if you press the little button that has a speaker on it and the light, when that goes white, you can then roll that wheel and it'll adjust the brightness of the RGB lighting up and down. So there's no button to change the RGB lighting where you have to press the function button and that. Instead, you're using the volume wheel. So it's a multi-purpose volume wheel, which is pretty interesting. You have 20 different lighting effects in here, and you can access them by pressing the function key and insert and switching between them. There is software, but you have all these controls at hardware level, and you can see some of the effects here. So you can go between different ones. Some of them are reactive to key presses, some of them just make colors go across the keyboard in the usual sort of way, and you can see some of them are actually quite nice effects and offer up some interesting visuals. You can also adjust the speed, speeding it up and slowing it down if you're using one of the effects that zips up and down the keyboard. And again, I think this actually shines quite nicely, and it actually has better RGB lighting than the G915. Though obviously over time that's going to run the battery down a bit faster if you're using the brighter RGB lighting, but you can turn it off entirely, or you can adjust the brightness really easily. Now if you press the function key and the tab button, that turns the RGB lighting off and puts it into a white mode, so the light's just white, backlighting is turned completely white, and it's nice to have so many different functions. I think you can just switch between lots of different things. There's loads of sort of extra hidden functions in that function key and other button presses that you can easily access. So press A and D to speed up and slow down the lighting effects, or press the insert button to change the lighting effects, or press tab to change it to white. And as I said, also pressing the function button and 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 switch between the various modes. That is one of the points of annoyance though, is if you have the wireless dongle plugged in and you have the cable plugged in, you have to sort of press the function key and the button to switch between them. If you're using the wireless dongle, for example, and you notice the battery's getting low and you plug in the USB cable, it doesn't automatically start working with the USB. So you have to actually press the function key and number 5 in order to change to it, which is a small annoyance. Now, in terms of quality, I found that this keyboard felt a bit sort of light in the hands. You can see it's about just under 600 grams, so it is fairly light. It does feel a little bit flimsy and a little bit cheap, but then it is cheap, and you can see some of that in something like this sticker here with the logo on it. I noticed that it was ever so slightly wonky, and I wanted to take it off and adjust it. When I did so, I found that there was a screw missing underneath, and minor point that doesn't seem to be causing any problems, and it's easy enough to take that off and put it back, so you definitely have that can do with relative ease. And I suppose you could probably 3D print something and put it in there as well if you were that way inclined and that talented. But I do really like a lot of things about this keyboard. I really like, basically they've mimicked the G915 but also made it very feature rich in a number of different ways. Some of the things aren't that good quality. The volume wheel, for example, isn't, but the fact that it's multifunctional makes it pretty interesting. I also found it interesting that you have hardware level macro setup. So if you press a number of different buttons that are referenced in the manual, you can basically set it so it's in recording mode for the macros, and it basically sets up a memory. You'll also notice that F1, F2, F3 and F4 are different profiles, so there's onboard memory for 4 different profiles, and then you have a macro recording on each of those G keys at the top, so you can have 4 different macros set up across 4 different profiles, so you have multiple different profile setups that you can easily change between. And in the software you can also customize the various keys, so there's a lot of potential flexibility in here that makes it quite appealing and interesting, and I think incredibly feature rich for a very affordable keyboard, which is almost certainly a highlight. The other thing that I found surprising is that the stabilization setup isn't too bad. There's not a really horrible pings or rattles and horrible noises from the keyboard itself. Yes, I did say it feels a little bit cheap, and perhaps the stabilization is not perfect, but it certainly sounds nicer than even some of the more expensive keyboards I've tested out. This seems to be a trend from Redragon, delivering actually surprisingly good keyboards and peripherals for a very affordable price that's comparable with other much more expensive things out there. So I think in a lot of different ways this keyboard's actually very pleasant and well worth considering. There is, however, one small drawback that I do want to talk about, and that's my experience with the wireless connectivity. So plug the dongle into your PC, press the function key and 4 to switch to 2.4 GHz mode, and then you have the wireless freedom that you'd expect from a wireless keyboard. Theoretically great, and for the most part the experience was really good. However, I did notice that there was a problem with some connectivity. Now, I have updated the firmware, and I'd recommend updating the firmware if you have the same problem if you buy this keyboard, and that seemed to improve things a little bit. However, there is still a problem with it. Sometimes the signal doesn't seem to get through to the PC, and this happens when I'm gaming and working on it as well. And obviously that's quite frustrating if a key press isn't being registered, and it doesn't seem to be constant. Now, it's worth bearing in mind that I have a lot of wireless devices in my room. My headset's wireless, my mouse is wireless, my keyboard's wireless. I also have another keyboard dongle plugged into the PC. There's a lot of things that could be potentially interfering with the signal, and so that might explain why. And perhaps if you don't have as many things, if you just have one wireless keyboard and a wired mouse, for example, you might not have a problem. So I'm not saying that this is going to be an issue for everybody, and I think it's worth noting. However, it was very frustrating for me, and it is some real letdown for the keyboard itself. My PC isn't very far away, the signal just isn't great, unfortunately, or there's something that's causing it to drop out. I've had no issues at all when it's plugged in and wired, and obviously that gives you a solid connection, so in wired mode it's absolutely fine. However, it is important to note such a problem, but overall it's been a great experience for the money. You can see from these close-up shots that it's very nicely designed in a number of ways, and it has very nice angles and accents on it and a really good overall aesthetic. There's a lot of things to like about it. It has a very nice premium looking design, actually belies the actual feel of it. So in reality, it doesn't feel as nice if you pick it up on the desk and maybe sort of flex it and things like that. But when you're typing on it, it doesn't bend. It's pretty solid. It's nice feedback from it. It's relatively quiet. It's pleasant to use. I found it so comfortable to use that I actually forgot I wasn't using the G915 at some points. So it actually is a very good entry point. And this is the thing that I'm going to say in the Versus video as well when I get to it, is that if you ever looked at the G915 TKL and thought, I really fancy that keyboard, but you didn't want to spend that amount of money, then this is a great alternative to that, to be honest, and a very nice one indeed. Now stick around for a sound test and hear some more of what this keyboard sounds like. And if you'd like to find out more about how it stands up to the G915 TKL, please be sure to subscribe and come back for more. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Thanks for watching. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Hope you found this video useful, interesting, hilarious, or otherwise. Take a look at these other videos that I think you might find interesting as well. And have a look at the description for links and other information you might find useful. Click that join button to see the benefits of being a member of my YouTube channel. And most importantly, have a great life.